I really don't understand the appeal of Ben Shapiro. Hi, I'm Rantz Minority. Welcome back to my channel where I do social and political commentary. Now, we respond to a lot of right-wingers on this channel, and today's response is long overdue because are you really a Breadtube if you haven't responded to this person? Today's video is about the fast-talking yet somehow slow-thinking Ben Shapiro. He's an advocate for freedom of speech, except when it has anything to do with protesting against systemic racism, which he believes is imaginary.
The civil rights movement, when people are raising the black power fist at the Olympics to say, like, we're fighting for civil rights, Jim Crow is still in operation around the country. Right. Colin Kaepernick taking the knee to symbolize that America's police are systemically brutal and racist is just, it's factually untrue, and to attribute that to the American flag is really kind of nasty. But
he's also a pretty bad reader. Like, he'll incorrectly cite a source, and sometimes the source would debunk him at like the first page.
Gender suicide rate is 40%. It is 40%. And according to the Anderson School at UCLA, it makes no difference. There's a study that came out last year. It makes no difference, virtually no difference, statistically speaking, as to whether people recognize you as a transgender person or not.
So Ben Shapiro is a subpar human being at most. So the bar is already pretty low for his audience to accept his arguments. Today we're going to be focusing on his arguments against representation and grammar, I guess. Mostly representation. The video we're responding to today is from his podcast where he skims over a New York Times article and give his big brain opinion on the New York Times article and the movie Get Out. Now, you may have already heard Ben's take on Black Panther, which he pretty much dismisses the effect of good representation.
Release of Black Panther. It is so deeply important. It is, we've heard it's deeply important to millions of Black Americans who, after all, were not liberated from slavery 200 years ago and liberated by the civil rights movement with federal legislation, have not been gradually restored to what always should have been full civil rights in the United States. I mean, none of that has mattered up till they made a Marvel movie about a superhero who is black in a country filled with black people. It's the most important moment in Black American history. Not Martin Luther King, not Frederick Douglass, not the Civil War, not the end of Jim Crow, none of that. Not Brown versus Board. The most important thing is that Chadwick Boseman puts claws on his hands and a mask on his face and runs around jumping off cars in CGI fashion. Deeply, deeply important. Black children everywhere will now believe that they too can be superheroes who jump off cars in fictional countries. It's very important.
Not wrong with that, but he has an equally stupid take on the movie Get Out, which we'll be looking at today. As I mentioned earlier, the New York Times had released an article in which they'd announced that they'd be capitalizing the B in black when referring to Black Americans or people of African descent. Now, according to the article, this goes all the way back to the W.E.B. Du Bois era. Bois had started a letter writing campaign back in 1926 where he asked all publications to start capitalizing the and the Negro. He felt the use of the small letter to describe 12 million people was an insult. Now, back in 1926, the Times turned him down and they came around about 1930. Fast forward almost a century later and the topic is up again, but now the discussion is, should we capitalize the B in Black Americans? The New York Times and many other publications felt this would better convey a sense of respect towards people of African descent. Now, this seems fine, right? Who could ever be offended by this? Who could be offended by capitalization? The answer is totally logical. Ben, everyone's a snowflake but me, Shapiro. He felt the need to white knight for white Americans because, well, I'll let him explain and I'll cut in and give context to the bullshit. Of course, there'll be a source list in the description below. But before that, if you aren't already subscribed to my channel, what are you doing? Every subscriber I get is one more subscriber closer to being able to quit my day job, and you don't want to halt that. I deserve it and so do you. And if you're feeling generous, I have a Buy Me a Coffee account now, which is better than Patreon because you don't have to pay for a monthly subscription and you can do one-time donations and you don't have to have an account. Some YouTube help channels said it was one of the best ways to support creators, so there's that now. Link in the description below along with all my other social medias. But anyway, I'm babbling on to the video.
Apparently, the New York Times is going to use the uppercase black to describe people and cultures of African origin, both in the United States and elsewhere. New style is also consistent with our treatment of many other racial and ethnic terms. We recently decided to capitalize Native and Indigenous, while other ethnic terms like Asian American and Latino have always been capitalized. We'll retain lowercase treatment for white. While there is an obvious question of parallelism, there's been no comparable movement toward widespread adoption of a new style for white. And there's less of a sense that white describes a shared culture and history. Again, this goes back to I keep quoting white fragility because that's where this crap is coming from. The basic idea here is that whiteness only exists in opposition to blackness. So there's no such thing as a white identity. There's only a cohesive black identity.
Okay, we're less than a minute in and Ben has already been dishonest and strawman the entire argument. See, I actually read the article because I never trust a conservative. And it turns out one of the big reasons why these publications didn't want to capitalize the W in white, because that style had been adopted and pushed forward by white supremacist groups. Read this in just about every article about this on the New York Times and the Washington Post. They always include that, okay, it's white, has been pushed forward by white supremacist groups. This is mentioned in the article at least 3 times, and Ben doesn't mention it once in the video, but I digress.
You're gonna have to explain that one to me. Seriously, because you're gonna have to explain to me why a person from Haiti and a person from Zimbabwe have the same cultural heritage and history as, they have the same, so they deserve to be capitalized as capital B Black. They're part of the same cultural and ethnic history.
A person from Haiti and a person from Zimbabwe would not necessarily share the same history or culture. If you do like a quick little Google search, you can find out these 2 places have different cultures. And in fact, hold on. Just so I'm not talking out of my ass, I will do a quick Google search. The amount of diversity in culture in Africa is abundant. The culture of Haiti is African with a European mix because of colonization. Zimbabwe has many cultures within itself alone. So to say that they have the same culture would be kinda inaccurate, actually be really inaccurate. But yes, you could consider those people Black still.
But a guy from Austria and a guy from Germany, 9 miles apart, who are both white, they share no common ethnic heritage. None, according to this. I mean, it's ridiculous, obviously. The basic idea instead is that whiteness is bad, blackness is good, because blackness is an identity. White can only exist in opposition to blackness, and therefore whiteness is truly about racism, right? This is a word that you will see very often in the woke literature, is whiteness. Whiteness as a descriptor of badness.
What? I'm so fucking confused. Okay, Germany and Austria still don't have the exact same culture, although say Austria does have some influence from Germany, yes. He's confusing nationalities and race and ethnicity and just about any term that has to do with identity right now. You can say you're white, but you can't make an assumption about ethnicity. Ethnicity has more to do with heritage and how you identify.
Right, you have internalized your whiteness. If you integrate into the systems, you are internalizing your whiteness.
Where in the article was that said? He just is making these assumptions and going about these. Ben likes to attack this imaginary liberal in the room. Acts like any acknowledgement of race or, God forbid, racism is an attack on him personally. Sit around all day and talk about black on black crime, 1350, and how he thinks black community is broken. But the minute you mention systemic racism, I found that whiteness is usually described in academia when it has to do with like systems of racism. So if you're talking about systems of racism and you're talking about America and majority of the people in the system are white, and sorry?
This is how they can call people like Clarence Thomas an Oreo, because the idea is that he has internalized his whiteness, right? He's a black man, but he's white on the inside because he's internalized his whiteness. By the way,
I'm not sure how I feel about Ben Shapiro telling me what an Oreo is. For those of you who don't know, when people get called an Oreo in the black community, usually it's in reference to how they dress or how someone talks or how someone acts. It's not really them saying you internalized your whiteness, because how the fuck are you gonna internalize something you don't have?
this is sort of the premise of it's unbelievable this movie really was not perceived as how racist it is. The movie Get Out is really about this, right? The idea of Get Out is a black man who's being treated incredibly well by a white family, and then of course it turns out to be a horror story about them attempting to capture his body and then turn him into a white person on the inside, right? They literally want to take his body and then take their white souls and put them in his black body to take control of his body, right? This notion that whiteness is the threat, because whiteness only exists in opposition to blackness. The only thing that brings white people together is being in opposition to black people, is quite a linguistic twist. But this is the way that we are going to divide the country and make the country worse and worse. That is the direction in which we are moving.
It's not really an Oreo because there's an actual white person present, but I digress. He uses one example of a white family in a movie being portrayed negatively and acts like it is an attack on white culture and a fucking ethnic cleansing is coming now. Like, I just love how he shits on the book White Fragility while being the most fragile white man I've ever fucking seen. I also find it extremely ironic that he'll acknowledge how this movie is a bad representation on white people. However, he has never acknowledged bad representation of any other race. Get Out, the movie that is a commentary on racism and vilifies racism in America. Ben Shapiro defends the villains. Why are you so offended by racism being villainized in a horror movie? Would you be saying this if the antagonists were Asian or something? I feel like you wouldn't. So here we see Ben can clearly understand how being portrayed in media badly can affect how people view a certain race. So here we have that. He picked the worst example ever to describe this, but he clearly understands how this can happen. Yet, he cannot understand how good representation can have a positive impact on people. Now, Ben isn't the only one who has trouble understanding this. I see a lot of people on the right wing using terms like forced diversity and whatnot. Whenever the topic of a black or LGBT or woman character comes in, it's always a conversation on, well, why would they need to be gay or trans or black, or like, it's always some fucking, it's always like a two brain cell conversation when we're talking about it. So today we're talking about representation and how it can truly affect Black Americans. So we can just get an idea of how stupid Ben is. If you don't already know that, then boy am I glad you're watching this fucking video. Be sure to subscribe if you're new and you're still watching. And again, there will be a source list in the description below. Representation has been a hot topic since like Black people got off the fucking boat. One of the big reasons the movie Get Out was looked forward to because it's one of the few horror movies with a black main character, and one of the few horror movies that discuss racism in this way. Ben thinks this is bad representation for white people, then I ask him to please never watch The Django or 12 Years a Slave, because the white people are pretty bad in those movies, except Leo. And honestly, Candace Owens did a great performance in that movie. Like, very strange that Ben has no issue talking about all the negative aspects of Black America and painting them in such a bad way, but he has never talked about the long documented bad representation of people of color. If the movie Get Out is going to change the way white people are viewed in this country, then you better be ready to admit how the media has influenced people view Black Americans in this country, and how they have been viewed all throughout history, in part because of the way the media has portrayed them. Talk about vilifying of a race. White Americans are the least likely to be badly represented. But for Black Americans, it's fucking peak. Which is why you don't hear anyone crying about white representation or needing better white representation, because it's not really much of an issue. As I mentioned earlier, representation has been a long documented topic. In the 1900s, there's this guy, I think it was like Frantz or some shit. He spoke a bit about the way Black people represented through literature and how this can affect the way Black people are viewed in the country and how Black people view themselves. His book, Black Skin, White Mask, explains how stereotypes that are conveyed through books, movies, and other aspects of literature and media trap Black Americans within a false image of themselves. About Birth of a Nation or Little Black Sambo. These examples are dated, but they still had an effect on the way Black Americans were viewed. If someone's only interaction with Black America is what they see on the media and TV, then they are likely going to have takes about as smart as Ben Shapiro's. At the time he wrote this, black skin was often associated with villains and threat in media. This quote is basically in reference to how Black Americans can want to distance themselves from their culture after viewing themselves in such a terrible light all their lives. And also argued in his book that Black people who defy these stereotypes were often treated with suspicion. That's just to give you an idea how this conversation was going all the way back then. But if you want something more recent, this study basically explains how media of all types basically presents a distorted view of Black Americans and Black culture. Most of this negative painting is coming from right-wing Christian publications. Now, these distorted understandings of Black males and Black people in general can lead to real-world consequences such as the likelihood of you being hired or promoted, the likelihood of you being admitted to a school, directly affect school grades, directly affect the chance of you getting a loan, affect your health and life expectancy, and can end up affecting the state of social policy, such as police practices in these communities. One of the most discussed distorted understandings is the association with Black males and criminality. News media not only are Black males more likely to be presented in a way that makes them seem more threatening, Black people are also overrepresented as perpetrators of violent crime when compared with the arrest rates in news media. Also underrepresented in sympathetic roles such as the victim. In a study done in the 90s, stories about Black people were 4 times more likely to include a picture of a mugshot when compared with white people who were accused of crimes. Stories tend to paint a picture that is likely to reinforce negative stereotypes you already have. For example, when on the news, when a low-income Black family is shown, they're more likely to be shown in the slums. The media effect also adds to this by what they choose to leave out in these stories. This can include the presence of modern-day discrimination. This discrimination played a role in accumulating wealth for generations, the role that poverty can have in crime, they're affected by structural changes to the global economy. These things are left out in news stories when they have to do with Black people. One of the biggest examples of how bad representation can affect the way everyday Black Americans are viewed, to look at the justice system, for example. This type of bias can lead to sentencing Black males longer for the same crime as a white male, or increase the likelihood of a Black male being sentenced to death. To affect how lawyers can view a jury, and implicit bias and representation is something that plays a big part in the criminal justice system and the justice system in general. It's weird because he crowns the argument of personal responsibility for Black Americans, but he doesn't want good representation being shown to Black Americans and more successful Black people on TV and media and news and whatnot as a Black child growing up then you may develop a better sense of personal responsibility. When I'm just convinced Ben doesn't like to see black people excited about anything. Dismisses the importance of representation, should not be taken seriously, and most likely doesn't know much about goddamn anything. Ben will never address the way media portrayals negatively affected black Americans. But one movie comes out where white Americans are vilified in a movie about fucking racism, he's livid. Yeah, 10 out of 10 logic points for Ben there. Hypocrisy is an understatement. The video was awful, I can't take anymore. It's gonna be the end of this video, guys. Hope you enjoyed. I apologize for my absence, I've been really busy and editing takes a long ass time. The channel's been growing really fast, so that's really awesome. So I definitely don't want to take it for granted. Not like quitting, and I definitely will be trying to get back on my once a week schedule. 2 weeks ago, the YouTuber Xanderhal he's a Breadtuber. Most of you probably know who he is since you're mostly from Reddit. But anyway, he shouted me out on one of his videos and said he liked one of my videos, and I was like, oh shit, that's freaking awesome. So now I have validation from a big YouTuber, which now means I will never quit. Stay to the end of the video, then you're pretty much one of the only people who know about that. So, you know, we're sharing secrets here, guys. In other words, we're growing very fast, so stay tuned, and may your Vaush be Jubilee.